Prince Charles, now King Charles III, is playing in terms of a very delicate balancing act. On the one hand, he is grieving the loss of his mother, but now transitioning into a new role, that of King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Talk to us about how he is going, what you think, how he's going through this.
Well, we saw in that beautifully crafted, brilliantly worded speech which he gave yesterday, that he is inspired by his mother. Indeed, it was his mother's address in 1947 that everyone remembers when she was Princess Elizabeth. She turned 21 in Cape Town, and she swore to serve her whole life. Now, as we all know, the Prince is 73, the King, Charles, is 73, and he's had the longest period waiting to become king in history, but equally he's used it so profitably for charity. However, what is important when a monarch takes office is the duties, and those duties are to be advised by ministers, to encourage and warn. So he signs bills, he has audiences with the Prime Minister, he reads the speech from the throne in the government's words. But he cannot in any sense be an activist. One of the things that came across in the speech yesterday was that this was something that he was and recognised he had to put aside. The other issue which is important is that he is Supreme Governor of the Church of England. I mean, the Queen was deeply religious in a very secular age. So far as the Prince is concerned, we know he would rather be Defender of Faith, but that isn't his title, and he did make it clear that his loyalty first is to the Church of England, although we are in a multi-faith society. The other thing, of course, important was that he created William and Catherine, Prince and Princess of Wales, very, very significant. And also, the way he is wording his declarations and his speeches, yesterday's ended with a quote from Hamlet. Today, too, it was a continuation of the constitutional duties of a monarch. I noticed, for example, that he will be receiving the sovereign grant in exchange for the crown lands. That's something the sovereign does at the beginning of a reign. I would say that George III swapped them in 1760 because he was deeply in debt, and that has not proved profitable for the monarchy because they bring in a great deal of money. But the monarchy brings in a fortune for Britain, and there's no doubt whatsoever that in these opening period, because it's a relatively short time since the Queen died, he has shown that with a very colourful walkabout too. I mean, giving someone a kiss, you wouldn't have had that in the past. And I think he is getting this balance between private grief, accessibility, and the dignity of his office absolutely perfectly right.
We are watching, as you very rightly pointed out, a brilliantly orchestrated ceremony in central London right now. We've been I mean, a lot has been talked about in terms of comparisons between King Charles III and his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II. I'm wondering if you could sort of maybe, aside from the age issue, some of the differences that you're seeing in terms of when she ascended to the throne in her early 20s to what's happening now as we see King Charles III take over after the death of Britain's longest-serving monarch.
Well, indeed, there's absolutely no comparison, really, because the Queen grew up in a deferential age. She didn't even think she would be king, as her father was a shy and stammering naval officer. It was thought that his flamboyant brother did indeed become king, but fortunately only for under a year. King Charles has spent his whole period as Prince of Wales in preparation, but it's a preparation of a very, very different age. As we all know, this is the age of social media, it's the age of interviews. It has to be said that he has had a controversial past. His marriage to the Princess of Wales was a nightmare, and certainly in those years, he certainly lacked PR expertise, which he did show when he was rehabilitating Camilla after the tragic death of Diana in 1997. But the Queen, in the 1950s, when she ascended the throne, it was a very deferential age. Nobody criticized the monarch, and indeed the coronation was the most glittering of ceremonies, and a large percentage of the population thought the Queen literally was placed where she was by God. So you couldn't have more different times. The genius of the Queen was that throughout her reign she was a constant, but a constant who always held the nation's affection and love. The prince, who's now king, will have, of course, a far shorter period, but nonetheless he has, inspired by her, pledged to serve his whole life, and he's done it in a way in the first part of his reign, and you see this colourful ritual and the splendid, I see showing on the screen, the accession council in St James's Palace, which was filmed for the first time, when the heralds read out the proclamation that he was king, and the public were allowed in. There are changes. There will continue to be more changes, but they will be commensurate with the dignity of the office. That's that balance, because you see these brilliantly colourful scenes, Britain's superb at its ceremonial, but on the other hand, also there is the need to move with the times.
Richard, since we're talking about comparisons and differences and similarities, let's stay on this. I mean, I was talking a little bit earlier today, and I'd like to get your opinion in terms of what the significant other, the spouse, the partners of the rulers of the United Kingdom and their transition. I mean, I think I gave this example because so many people around the world have watched television series like The Crown. It was very apparent that the late Prince Philip somewhat struggled to actually transition into his new role as being the significant other of the ruler of the United Kingdom. How do you think the Queen Consort is dealing with it? I mean, obviously they've been together for much longer with King Charles III, but it is a transition nonetheless.
It's very interesting, this question, because every king has had a queen consort. Victoria had a prince consort, but Albert was, for example, able to sit in on audiences with prime ministers and see state papers. Prince Philip became enormously frustrated, you're right, in the early 1950s when he could do none of these things, including give his name to his children. But on the other hand, he built up an amazing charitable portfolio, and also, in time, with his dynamic energy, did tremendous amount of good, both supporting the Queen and the monarchy and in so many fields. So far as Queen Camilla is concerned, I mean, I think the important thing, and of course we know that there's a background to this dating back to the 1970s, but we know that she and the prince, now the king, but when they met, it was clear their chemistry was perfection. I mean, they're similar age groups, similar friends, similar sense of humor, similar attitudes. And that is one of the reasons that I think King Charles will be superb at the job, because he'll have a support. Remember, of course, that the Queen, when she was looking back in the 1990s, said that Prince Philip was her strength and stay, because although they had very opposite temperaments, they combined their amazing talents for the betterment of the monarchy and of the nation. And I think that Queen Camilla, being so similar to Prince Charles, who's now king, I think that will be one of the props that he can rely on, because there's tremendous pressure in the job. And as you pointed out yourself earlier, there is this personal grief, having lost his mother, and yet being thrust into the limelight in this way with every single movement examined. It's part and parcel, you could say, of the job, but it's a very demanding job. And with Queen Camilla, King Charles, I'm sure, will have the support that he needs.
Another demanding job will be that executed by the new Prince of Wales. King Charles III, in his first nationwide television address on Friday evening, said that he had created Prince William as the Prince of Wales, along with the Princess of Wales, Kate. Talk to us about how they will be transitioning into that role. I mean, the Prince Charles, many years ago transitioned at a fairly young age or a similar age. How will they be taking on more roles?
I think that it was very significant. Also, this was, I think, an inevitability because if you look at William and Catherine, they and their family are the future of the monarchy. Obviously, they're a great deal younger. King Charles is 73, Queen Camilla is 75, and the young has a greater appeal worldwide. There's a certain glamour about it, and also they are campaigners for a variety of charities, not in the same number. I noticed that, for example, the Queen had over 500, the Duke of Edinburgh at one time had over 800, and King Charles, when he was prince, had, I think it was over 400. What William and Catherine have done, they've taken relatively few in number, but they've concentrated and given enormous profile and cachet to those which they've chosen. I'm thinking of the environment with the Earthshot Prize, mental health, issues with the under fives, which Catherine's championed, and so forth. So, of course, they moved recently to Adelaide Cottage on the Windsor estate so that all three of their children can go to the same school. But, of course, again, they will be the pivot of the future because they are not only popular, but also they're deeply committed. There is, of course, the rift in the family between the brothers and indeed between the Sussexes and the royal family at the moment. It could be hoped that what has just happened might be some way that the family could reconcile, but there's absolutely no question that the Prince and Princess of Wales will be absolutely pivotal with their support, with the support also of the Earl and Countess of Wessex and the Princess Royal, Princess Anne. 7 key royals will be the support and absolutely essential in the way the monarchy moves forward, the way it continues to connect with the people, and the way also ceremonies like this, which could seem arcane to some, are so brilliantly colourful and so carefully choreographed, which is one of the reasons that there is the worldwide interest there is in the British monarchy.
When the monarchy, I mean, when we're talking about moving forward for the monarchy, I think one of the themes that is repeatedly brought to surface is that the ruler needs to sort of modernize times. This was the case 70 years ago when Queen Elizabeth sort of ascended to the throne. How do you, in which areas do you think the new king can actually achieve this, or what is needed in your opinion?
I think monarchy changes as the times change. I think the danger is when it becomes behind the curve, so to speak. For example, primogeniture was only abolished, that's the male child getting precedence over the female, only 9 years ago. I mean, it had been abolished in European monarchies, or in some European monarchies, a long time before. Also, it was in the 1960s and 70s that the Swedish and Norwegian crown princes decided that they would marry for love. This is something that obviously has been happening now with William and Catherine and subsequently Harry and Meghan. But it does mean that it takes time for change to occur. I mean, the way the royals have responded to social media has been very encouraging because I think they've handled it well. And indeed, the Queen's broadcasts, the virtual broadcasts, were absolutely brilliant. The Queen, of course, from a different era, and you asked this earlier, never gave an interview directly to camera. King Charles has given so many when Prince, and has been something of a campaigner, which he now can no longer be in the same sort of way. But equally, the way the institution will move forward will obviously, the way the palaces are used, the numbers of staff, the cost and so forth. I've always thought the cost, 77p per person, excluding security a year, is very, very reasonable. I've also thought that the refurbishment of Buckingham Palace, which is the world's most high-profile palace, 369 million over 10 years, a superb investment. If you look at the jubilees and you look at the trooping, the colour and the way it's used, it's a living palace. So all of this, I think, is something that, I mean, there's been talk of a so-called slimmed down monarchy. I think we must beware of that, because the royals have links to some 3,000 regiments, charities, bodies, institutions of one sort or another, and so forth. It's precious to them. It means it gives them cachet. It attracts donors. It also gives them a certain feeling of probity, and it could mean access to palaces and so forth. They might use them for events. So that is a very important part of monarchy. There may be fewer royals. It looks as if there will be, and that will mean something that will be slimmed down. But this has been something that has long been identified with the king when he was prince. And I hope it doesn't move too quickly, because royal links are so precious. And what we're seeing at the moment, time-honored traditions, also updated, as with television, which we saw with that very impressive Accession Council ceremony that in 2 parts earlier today. To some, it would seem something strange for the modern era, but if in point of fact it's pivotal to our written constitution with the monarchy, which is above party politics, it has meaning.
Richard, you mentioned sort of slimmed down monarchy. I want to ask you, when Queen Elizabeth ascended to the throne in the early 1950s, since then over the in the 70 years ensuing that, she visited close to, I believe, 100 countries. How do you? And she's also the well, she was also the ruler of, I believe, 14 other countries. How do you think King Charles III will approach this? Will there be a lot of trips abroad to Commonwealth countries, to or other countries as well?
I think, firstly, regarding the trips abroad, yes, absolutely, because the British government has long decided that the way their best use of soft power is to send the royal family abroad. It benefits the ties, benefit British business, cultural events and so forth, exchanges of all sorts of benefit, as well as enormous publicity, and that will continue. And certainly, yes, there are 1 or 2 trips like the then Duke and Duchess of Cambridge to the Caribbean. There have been occasional problems. There always were. The Queen in Quebec in the 1960s, in India and Pakistan in the 1990s, there were difficulties. But normally, royal visits abroad are enormously successful, and I'm sure that'll continue. Regarding the point, and again, 14 countries out of the Commonwealth's 56 have the Queen as head of state. And the answer, I'm sure, is that there will be countries that decide to move to a republic. There will be those that remain with the crown. One does have to say this is up to the people of each individual country, naturally, but also, most importantly, I do feel when there's a change, it should be put to the people. Barbados became a republic recently, but they didn't have a vote. Could that be because they thought there might be a vote to keep the monarchy? One just wonders.
All right, royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams, thank you very much for joining us here on our continuing coverage. I do appreciate it. It's always a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you very much.